We got people.
Yeah.
All right. So we are apparently live. I think people are actually watching us now. So I'm going to jump in and say things that are actually important. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit slowly for those that are probably trickling in right now for the start time, and just tell you a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing this. So MindSpark has actually decided to launch a series where we're doing a monthly panel discussion on a different topic each month. This topic for the month of May is Fintech. So we've been talking a lot about money, and we've been talking about sort of the idea of how much Fintech has revolutionized our lives, how it has changed our interaction with money and our interaction with a lot of different institutions like banks, but not only banks, also other kinds of lending opportunities and other kinds of shopping mechanisms. So just wanted to let you all know that we are going to be doing a new one of these each month. So if you do see us talking about any of these other topics and you have something interesting to say on any of those topics, feel free to reach out to us, because maybe you would want to speak on one of our future panels. And then as well, before we get started and I hand everything over to Nick, wanted to say a really big and important thank you to our panelists for today, who are our panelists for our first ever in this series, which we're really excited to launch. I know this is going to be a really great conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all unfolds. And with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Nick, who is my colleague at MindSpark, who is going to be your host for this panel discussion. So with that, I will be in the background. Definitely feel free to make use of the chat if you have questions, if you want to say anything. There's lots of cool buttons here in terms of reacting to the discussion. So yeah, definitely interact as much as possible, and I will be still around.
Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. Again, guys, welcome to MindSpark's FinTech panel. Very excited to have everyone here. This is a topic that I think is changing the world day by day, every day. So this is extremely exciting. We've got such a wide range of experienced panelists in different areas. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second, but out of formality, we have Sara Hefny from Xapo here. We have Abbas Jaffer from Robinhood, and we have Olga Mishyna, I hope I got that right, from Adyen. So very excited to have all three of them here, and I'd love if you would just take a second and introduce yourselves. Tell us a bit about your passions, how you ended up here, starting with Sara.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here, everyone. My name is Sara, and I am trained as an anthropologist, and I switched from academia. I transitioned from academia into UX research. And before I came over to Xapo, I was at Microsoft, and I am basically really interested in not only the transition from academia to UX research. So if you're somebody who's an academic and is interested in the transition, feel free to connect with me. But now that I'm in the fintech space, I am really interested in connecting my experience as a researcher in academia to my current work. So I worked with refugee resettlement in my dissertation and in my doctoral work. And so talking about how finances and how fintech is revolutionizing the way migrants, refugees, and other people, different, guess not as typical customers in the tech space, how fintech is revolutionizing the way these kinds of folks use money. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sara. And then Olga, I'll ask you, please, just tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a very interesting topic to discuss today. So I'm head of product design at Adyen. It's a fintech company. We facilitate payments around the globe, wherever people pay, as we say. And my interest lies in scaling team in a diverse and sort of organical way, and generally solving problems in fintech world for people.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And then last but definitely not least, Abbas, please, a bit about yourself. Would love to know.
Hey, everyone. My name is Abbas, and currently in UX research at Robinhood. And for those who don't know what Robinhood does, our mission is to democratize finance And there's sort of three major areas of product offerings today. There's investing brokerage, cash management, and in addition to the investing side, we've had a lot of developments in crypto, which folks are probably aware of. So I recently joined. Before that, I spent the last 4 years at Facebook in user research. And actually before that, I started my career. If folks want to start their career as freelancers or independent consultants, that's something I'm happy to chat with folks about, but largely in financial services in the Boston area. So I would say maybe the prehistory of the fintech revolution, when banks, insurance companies, and investment firms were saying, hey, we actually need digital experiences to work for people. So I have some spicy vignettes that I hope to share this morning.
That's awesome. Love to hear that. Incredible. It sounds like, so Robinhood's got these three pillars that you kind of mentioned. And I'll kind of spread this question out, but bouncing back to you, what sort of things do you think are actually really fueling the revolution that's happening in tech, especially those three areas of us?
Yeah, I think there's two sort of thematic trends that cut across sort of these different areas. I think one is, I guess, going beyond access to utility. So there's been a lot of discussion in the sector about access for many years. And I think people are thinking now across companies about how can we increase the utility to the customer day to day? How can we make this something which they can pick up and use with relatively low cognitive load, with relatively low confusion, and it becomes, like another utility they would have of a kind on their phone or on their computer. So I think utility is one theme that I've observed that's really driven this. I think the other area that's driven this is just frankly financialization. I think that financialization has sort of spread to every accompanying sector. So basically, if you look sector by sector in the economy, you see the role of financialization and how understanding flows of money, understanding growth, et cetera, are really important for people to, I guess, get a piece of it and for it to be sort of participatory in people increasing their own financial picture, their own financial success. So I'd say utility and I'd say financialization.
Yeah, just having that control as well too, and having use case as well. I understand that. Olga, do you have thoughts on that? Does that sound similar? What do you think about the things that are kind of pushing this fintech rev?
Yeah, I'm kind of agreeing that it's sort of like the age of demystifying the finances and making it more accessible, regardless where you are, what is your background, where are you coming from, do you have some inherited wealth, or you're starting from the ground up, and also like working with Adyen. What we are really focusing is to how to make payment world as accessible as possible for both sides. And so if you want to expand your company, so you don't have to go through some jumping through the hoops in order to enter the markets. So yeah, I think generally bringing resources to people and removing all these obstacles on the ways from them growing business, growing personal wealth, entering the investment, like exactly what Robinhood is doing. It's really demystifying things that have been behind the high fence for a long time.
Increased accessibility is a big thing, at least in my opinion. Sara, I'd love to hear what you think on that as well too.
Yeah, so I think what COVID has really shown all of us is that a lot of things that we thought had to be done a certain way because that was the way things were done was shown to be a complete social construct, right? We did things a certain way because that was how we as a society, whether nationally, locally, globally, decided that was how it was supposed to be done. And I think fintech is a kind of microcosm of kind of an example of showing things don't have to continue to be done a certain way just because that's the way we've done it historically, especially when the way things we've done historically have been very exclusive, have excluded certain communities, certain people in different parts of the world. And so I think this kind of disruption to show that no, there are different ways of doing things, disrupting the status quo trying to find more democratic, equal ways of allowing people access to places that have originally been in the realm of exclusivity of, like, to be perfectly frank, rich white men. We're showing it doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way, because if anything else we've learned from the COVID economy is that the way we've structured our economy this way thus far is not sustainable, and so we have to do things differently. And I think fintech is kind of the big area in the tech world that is showing those big levels of disruption.
Well said. Very well said. Oftentimes when I think about it, especially with fintech, when you're solving a problem, more problems kind of draw out of that, especially when you do something as large as what fintech has done, no matter if it's crypto or it's business to business or whatever it may be. So in that, going off of what you just said, Sarah, what sort of challenges now that you've solved, some of this inclusivity issues, what sort of issues do you think you're facing now, being in the fintech space? And I'll bounce that right back to you, Sarah.
Well, I don't think we've solved anything yet. I think that we've started to uncover the problems. I think it would be pretty arrogant to say that we've solved it, but I think that we've sort of peeled back the facade of like, oh, look, this is how everything works and everything's going well. We've started to say, this is all a farce. How can we kind of extract everything and start from the ground up? And honestly, like, finance, and especially when you're talking about banking is a very archaic institution. And so retroactively fitting a digital bank or a fintech startup or an app to original banking practices isn't going to work, because it's a fundamental reimagining of how people access their money. So I would say that we are at the very surface level of figuring out what are the fundamental issues that are related to access. And if we're going to take a step further when we're talking about currency and the explosion of discussion around crypto, what do we mean when we talk about money? And I have a couple of resources that I could mention for people who are interested in reading later, but like, the idea of money is completely socially constructed. The good thing about that is that we can restructure it. The bad thing is it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it could be a good thing or a bad thing, but it doesn't mean anything until we as a society give it meaning.
Very well put. Very well put. Olga, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I really will agree with Sarah on the things that we haven't solved the problems that there are, especially the accessibility and the spread of the fintech around the globe, because it is quite accessible right now for European countries, generally Western world. But if you look to Africa, Latin America, it's still not there, and there is a lot of work to be done there. Not speaking about the regular accessibility, which is like a huge percentage of the population that need to have an access to the bank. I don't know how it's in the other countries, but in Europe, it's just been a few years that accessibility became a mandatory thing for the banks, so everyone can access it. And I'm not even speaking about the people with disabilities, but also elderly people, children. How do we starting to build relationship of children with money? How do we build the right mindset, the right, relationship with the whole financial world? Because children learning so many things in school, but not things about the money. But this is a fundamentally important thing for the future of every human being. And if there is something in the Western world, there are still huge parts of this planet that are still being left out. And this is still something to be tackled by fintech.
Most certainly. Again, that accessibility piece is so huge, though. I think with that comes great responsibility. And I know all three of the companies you guys are involved with are definitely always working on those three things. Abbas, what are your perspectives on that specifically?
You may have seen me on mute chuckling when Sarah mentioned how grafting in a retro way to legacy banking wasn't going to solve problems of broadening, plus 1,000 to that. I think that what's really interesting in the sector is, in terms of reimagining, you have what we call challenge banks in Europe, or what you call neobanks, there's interchangeable, are trying to reimagine that, let's say for banking services. And for investment, you have a number of different firms pursuing different business models that then have an impact on customers. And that reimagining is very much necessary. I said I have some spicy anecdotes about working in the prehistory of the fintech revolution. And I worked on mobile apps for legacy banks. And I'll say that, yes, making the front end as crisp and usable as possible, great. I would say every legacy bank, please keep doing that. But at the same time, there are constraints. There's sort of a constraint in terms of their domain of thinking and their accumulated kind of procedures. Which are quite, even if you look at the tech stack, let's say, okay, I think all the panelists will realize that when we're dealing with things programmed in COBOL, for example, or like very, very legacy systems, they're hard to hook into. This is why it's created market opportunities for middle layer companies. Like it's the whole reason the opportunity exists, is the financial sector needs to catch up. I think furthermore that thinking sort of the next things to think about, I think are really about not necessarily new or exotic products, but rather thinking about how, as Olga said, like how the global community thinks about financial health outside of, especially the Euro-American sphere. There's a completely different set of constraints, regulatory environments, obviously, as well as creativity, coming ground up from these regions. So, rather than saying we have a, fintech model in this subsector that works, let's export it to EMEA and APAC. I think the question also might be, what creativity can we learn from what's going on there organically or through venture investment, and then best serve those international communities?
Abbas, it seems like you've got some deep, dark secrets that you just want to let loose on this whole panel. So, of course, and now I see you chuckling again. Feel free, of course, to disclose, kind of the things you find that have relation even prehistory to now. The reason I also mention that is because I feel like security becomes like this almost dangerous thing to talk about with banking, but also this extremely vital component of how do you become global as a financial app if you're AKA solving a problem. How important is security, and sort of what sort of things do you think are being done or could be done to kind of make this global financial health a positive experience? And Olga, I'll bounce that off to you actually, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a very painful relationship with the security because before Adyen, I was working in a big Dutch bank, ING, and for an entire year I was working on just login page. And login page is not a big thing, but when you bake it in a bank, and there are so many regulations, so many potential loopholes that can be abused by people. So it really takes a long time and a lot of thought and care put into it. And security is so important because generally security and the money is a very challenging thing. I was born in Soviet Union, and my family lived through, I think, now 3 or 4 defaults when your currency goes to completely a bucket and it's not there anymore. I never grew up with the feeling of trusting banks. Banks were something this thing exists, but it doesn't do anything for you. If you want money, you better have it very solid as a land, as a piece of, I don't know, something in a form of actual money that are put in a box somewhere stored. And now we're going into this digital era, and money pretty much in a lot of countries at least half digital. Like in the Netherlands, everything, I don't even have coins with me anymore or any kind of cash. It's all digital. How much do I trust the bank? Because those money are not really real. As Sara was saying, this is just a concept that we all agreed on, and it exists somewhere there and approved by the government. And what if tomorrow will happen something else and the government won't be there? What is this? How we can ensure that our future is there?
Yeah,
a lot of questions there.
So the social construct again too, in that security aspect. Sara, what are your thoughts on that? Because I see you smiling and nodding and thinking, yeah, this is on par with what I'm thinking.
Well, yeah, I mean, the concept of security is really complex because we're talking about money is an extremely sensitive, vulnerable topic for so many people. You know, it's one thing to download a music app. It's another thing to download an app that holds your life savings. So the stakes are quite high in this industry. And I want to talk about also the flip side of security, because I think if we're talking about security, one of the big reasons governments at least are kind of moving towards this digitization of finances is so they can track money, right? And the positive side of that is that, you know, tax evasion becomes much more difficult. I live in Italy, where a cash economy is primarily because people want to get paid in cash because they don't want to pay taxes. So government, terrorist activity, there are a lot of reasons why governments want to be able to track how money is flowing, which can be great. But the flip side to that, obviously, is privacy. And if you'll notice, even in Europe, we're looking about, people who are debanked, people who use cash for transactions, people who use credit cards for transactions. And within the EU, you've got generally low percentages of cash transactions until you get to places like Austria. Austria has over 50%. Over 50% of Austria's transactions are cash transactions. And Austria, you think of as, like a modern Western country. Why on earth are they continuing? Why is more than half the population continuing to use cash? For privacy reasons. They don't want companies, they don't want governments, they don't want businesses to know what they're doing with their money. And for a long time, Germany was the same way. And Germany was kind of known as like the country that operates on cash because they don't want people knowing what they're doing. And so I think that's another thing that we have to keep in mind is this sort of the flip side, like what are we giving up with regards to security, increased security? Okay, this is great. We can see what the money is going where. It's great, like we can make sure rich people are paying their fair share in taxes. That's great for us. But at the same time, you have an increased level of surveillance, right? And so that is, I think, a conversation that a lot of people are grappling with. What are we willing to give up in order to have access to things that perhaps more convenient, faster, easier? So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you for that. And actually, it kind of, for me, coincides with what you were saying about this, there's this huge conversation about cryptocurrency. And then on the other side of cryptocurrency is like this safety. Well, I don't want people to track my money, but if it's not tracked, is it volatile? And Abbas, I'm going to shift that over to you because you did mention, in the space of Robinhood, cryptocurrency has blown up. What are your thoughts on that exactly? And what sort of things can you mitigate or do you foresee as an issue?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of broad obstacles that we face. I think the first goes to both Sara and Olga mentioned this, is really about, trusting that the transactions are secure, number one. I was going to mention that on the U.S. side, the FDIC does a survey of underbanked and unbanked Americans. And, in addition, the top two reasons, number one is they don't think they have enough money to open any kind of financial account. Second reason they don't is because they don't trust things. And if you use logical inference and extend that to sort of fintech companies, trust has to be earned, not lost, because of the history we're emerging from, because of things that maybe aren't necessarily our fault, but that we inherit and we have to engage with. So I think particularly with digital currency, crypto, or even, many governments, as we all know, are trying to create their own kind of coins that are tied or tethered directly to their currency, that there's a real trust deficit with the public. And so I think there's a couple of opportunities, we have. I think the first is to really educate. I think education is probably the biggest thing that needs to be done right now in that space, because people, including people that are not in our sector, but just sort of everyday people, are hearing buzzwords thrown around in this space. So, distributed ledger, different types of blockchains, the fact that not just currency is backed by these blockchains. So when we start getting into the ephemera or these sort of corners, people read an article, I don't know, in TechCrunch about a video game backed by a blockchain. People are like, okay, what the heck? How is that a store of value for me if it can also be used for a game? Great for people in tech, like we're serving ourselves by doing that kind of stuff. But the question is, what does that do for public perception? And I think we all need to think really carefully about that.
Well put. Well put. Again, the so many hands that are on this. And, it's funny because crypto gets a lot of the conversation, but really it is everything to do with fintech, kind of birthed, in my opinion, where crypto ended up. Moving forward with that, I think more and more people are becoming educated. And on that, I know that a few times you've all mentioned, maybe you have some resources or thoughts. If you guys want to share those with us at some point and we can distribute it to, people that have come in or post them around, I'm sure people would love to hear, kind of what you're thinking or what you've thought of this process so far in fintech, even for educating on whatever it is, security, privacy, so on and so forth. I want to shift the conversation a bit more, though, specifically to what you three are doing, which is this design, product development, the UX side, the part that's probably maybe underappreciated, but probably the lifeblood I call it the lifeblood of fintech, this UX design, component. So in your opinion, Abbas, what sort of role does UX research play in what you're doing at Robinhood there? And then we'll pass it on to Sara. I'd love to hear your thoughts there too.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of different things that are of evergreen use to have UX sort of there horizontally alongside the technical functions within fintech. I think the first thing is really understanding financial flows as sort of a human process. I think that it is very important to lock up your security, to be looking out for fraud and money laundering and all of these issues that all of our firms have to deal with. But at the same time, the financial flows that our customers are concerned with are human experiences, right? They're covenants. And so in terms of UX research, I can say that really deeply understanding the experience of those flows, the emotions it evokes. Sara, you had a great gesture towards talking about just how vital this is and choosing to engage with any of our companies, right? In terms of, instead like a life saving, that's such a good point. Like really deepening the understanding of how a mental model around that affects what kind of product will best serve customers, number one. And I think the second thing where UX design and research can be very helpful is really in the experience itself, making sure that people not only feel empowered, but are empowered, right? Everything from transparency and control to the idea of providing a set of possibilities or products on offer with the right information and context for customers to take full advantage of those products. And so I think UX has a huge role. Absolutely.
Good old mute got me. Sara, I'll let you continue on with that.
Yeah, I think, I'm a researcher. I really don't have a lot of experience on the design side. But as a researcher, I think one of the primary things that's important to keep in mind is that we are the advocate for our user, right? And not a lot of people have contact with a user who is actually using the product. We've got, I think a lot of companies have tried to include or develop ways of meeting the customer. So engineers and PMs and people in different roles have interface with the customer, but we are really on I don't want to use a military metaphor, but on the front lines of reaching out to the people who are actually using these products. And as a result, I think it's important because I think one of the risks the fintech world falls into is sort of a very big misunderstanding about what is considered common knowledge. So when you're in the fintech space, and particularly, my Xapo operates with US dollars and also operates in Bitcoin. There's such a huge gap in knowledge with regards to Bitcoin. And the bigger the gap in knowledge, whether it comes to any kind of money or crypto in particular, that leaves space. The bigger the gap is, the bigger the space is for people to have misinformation and concern and anxiety. And so I feel like one of the major roles that we play in the fintech world as researchers is to try to close that gap or help our product close that knowledge gap as much as possible, so people really feel like they know what they're getting themselves into. And it's really easy when you're downloading an app you don't really think about what you're getting yourself into when you're downloading an app when it doesn't come to your money. But with your money, like as Abbas said, like this is a covenant. Like they are consenting to us having access to their money. And so like any good researchers, we should do our best to make sure that is based on informed consent. That when they are agreeing to this, they're not just clicking the terms and conditions because they don't want to read through everything, but they actually know what it means to put their money in our hands. And so I think that is a huge responsibility that falls on us as researchers in this space.
Very good point. I think exactly in that too. When I download Angry Birds, I'm not concerned as to can someone get my credit card information on this platform. So very well put. Olga, I know, especially dealing with so many different currencies that Adyen does. What are your thoughts on UX design? Because it's, I know all the companies are global, but specifically there's a big focus there. What are your thoughts on UX research and how that's kind of shaping your products there?
Yeah, I will more look from the business side. For the businesses who are starting to operate, they're just opening their companies and they want to sell things to people, and they want to make sure that they do it in the most in the best way possible, and they're able to provide for their customers everywhere. They don't really know anything about the fintech. They don't know anything about financials to start with, because they have good knowledge about their own businesses. And fintech is there to support them and help them to understand these things. And that's where your research is so important, because it helps to kind of understand what is the knowledge level is there, and how we can lower the bar of entering financial services and starting to provide like different currencies in different countries, different ways of payment, not even necessarily like the currencies, but like if you want to pay with a credit card, if you want to pay with the PayPal, if you want to pay with any other digital wallet, like how can we help users to understand how to set it up, how to make sure that the entire experience of a relationship between business and their client is served through us. So let's say if a user buying something in a shop, but then they're going to buy something online, how can we help our businesses to connect that this is the same client, you're serving the same person, and so all the services, like helping them understand everything that is happening behind the curtain with all the money flows, with the machine learning, for example, helping businesses to understand how it all works, how they can protect themselves against fraud, and give those like the power to the businesses in a very understandable and a simple form that they can drive the growth of their own companies and their own businesses.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so, I want to say the fact that the three of you are in fintech, but in kind of these different sorts of pockets. All three of those answers had like such a different insight, but there is a bit of overlap. So I guess what I want to kind of ask is, and I know you probably briefly touched on it, if there was like one or two things, particularly that you see people are focusing on when it comes to UX teams in your, pocket of fintech, what would that be? What are one or two things that you think are the most pressing? And Olga, since you're on a roll, I'll bounce that back over to you as well, and I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think in the companies that provide payment solution to the businesses right now, the main focus like how to lower the bar to start your business. The main focus, how to empower people to take decisions that will help drive the growth of their business through the financial resources that we provide. Mm-hmm. So that's the main focus. It can be through the fraud prevention and machine learning. How do we explain this? Through the insights, how people spend their money in their businesses and what are they interested in, and we provided information back. So I think this is one of the most important points for the fintech, not because initial thought would be should be about the money, but it's not about the money. It's about the users and their relationship with the businesses. Mm. That's what we want to uncover as a financial institution.
Wonderful, wonderful. Abbas, the floor is yours on that one.
Yeah, I think there's a couple that really are top of mind. I think the first is understanding how people would add new types of investment vehicles or investing at all to their overall financial picture. So rather than in isolation, I talked about financial flows earlier. I really think, calling back to that, understanding what place that in various kinds of investment plays in people's everyday financial flows is incredibly important. And there's so many great questions to pursue there. And I think the second area to best serve people is really to understand what people's goals are. I think really deeply understanding goals. So yeah, they want to participate. Cool. There are different asset types. Cool. What are their goals? What are they hoping in terms of outcomes for them in their lives? And what could a company do to be there and provide the information needed and the support to help them reach their goals?
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Sara, I see you nodding your head again.
Yeah, no, it's just such an interesting conversation, and I love hearing from people who are kind of like in different, like as you said, pockets of the fintech world. In my corner of the world, I would say one of the key aspects is recognizing that in the 21st century, humans are increasingly mobile. We move around, we cross borders, we cross currencies, we cross languages, and there's no reason why our money should not be able to keep up with us. And so I think recognizing human mobility is just a fact of life nowadays. You know, the idea of having to physically carry US dollars to the country that you're traveling to and then pay exorbitant fees so that it gets changed into the currency that you need is just completely obsolete now. And so I think that's one key area of my corner of fintech. And then the next thing is stability in an area that is very increasingly tumultuous. So, and I think Olga's experiences growing up in the Soviet Union is a really important thing to keep in mind. If you're coming from Canada, or you're coming from the US, or you're coming from a Western European country that has a long history of a stable currency, the idea of your life savings being constantly at risk based only on the country that you live in and have the rest of it be outside of your control is a fact of life for millions and millions of people. And so the idea to lend some sort of stability to folks who want to be able to provide for their family, want to protect what they've earned from forces that are outside of their control is the other area that I think we're really working hard to provide a solution to.
No, wonderful. Very, very three distinct areas for those who are just figuring out exactly what they like or know about fintech. One of the things that sparks, comes to mind as you're talking about all this stuff is kind of on the tech side of automation, and because there's this need to control, of course, but then there's this idea of AI and those sorts of aspects of what fintech really is. So I've kind of a two-part question for each of you. I kind of want to get your perspective on, first of all, how important is RPA and AI right now in fintech? But on the secondary question, I want to know how you think AI is affecting the responsibility or skill levels needed for financial advisors. Because I think there's maybe, I don't know if you think maybe it's taking it away or maybe it's making them work harder. But I'd love to actually get your perspective on that. And Olga, I'm gonna get you to start off for me there, if you don't mind.
So I think that it's one of the aspects where we need to be extremely cautious because automation by itself is a great thing. It means it's gonna kind of give extra time for people to think more creatively and get rid of the boring, mundane activities. But on the other hand, if we give away some of the activities in the financial world to the automation, to the machine learning, AI, however you want to call it, it's really important to know and remember to build in a way that it doesn't discriminate other people and cut them off of the financial possibilities. Because these algorithms, even though they often referred as a black box, they're still being built and they use databases from the current world with all these biases and it's all flaws. So we really need to be extremely cautious. If we put giving mortgages and loans we put decision of giving mortgages and loans to the machine learning algorithm, how it is decided, on what decision are based. This we can control, and about this we need to be extremely cautious.
Well, yeah, very wonderfully said. Very wonderfully said. Sara, what are your thoughts on that? And again, just the need to being alert to kind of what AI means on both ends of the coin, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of issues come up with regards to ethics in AI. We saw what happened at Google not too long ago. Coming to terms with the fact that AI is directly connected with our values as a society, because AI is intelligence that we put in, right? Like the original input is based on humans and we're biased. And so we can't assume that, if a computer does it, then it's going to be completely objective. It's going to be completely bias free, because the computer learns from what we tell it. So I think that consciousness that Olga mentioned is something that is really important to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is sociality. What are our relationships with money? What do we expect? What kind of communication or relationships do we have to expect to have with regards to money? And I think that depends on where you come from. And I think it depends on what your background is. And, we were talking about unbanked people, the hundreds of millions of people who are completely unbanked, and the potential for them to go from, literally cash under the mattress to an app is a huge learning curve. And so we have to think about the assumptions that we have with regards to digitization and the way that people interface with a non-human. This could be someone's first time that they're interacting with an AI or a chatbot or a digital customer support person. So understanding that not everybody is going to have the same level of comfort and experience is also going to be important.
Most certainly. Again, I'm loving it. As I'm seeing your answer, I'm looking around at the panel. Everyone's got this head shake like they agree, but then the answer is not completely different, but so different. So there's, again, this is an interesting topic. So many different things, that go into it. Abbas, thoughts?
Oh gosh, yeah. You want my thoughts on AI and fintech? Okay, so I'll start with positives, and then I'll start with roadblocks. I think positives wise, we've seen a lot in the sector that works for people or for people from various socioeconomic strata, various empowered or disempowered sort of structurally groups. Some companies have done robos in a way that is, inclusive, educating, empowering, and some haven't. Some people have, some fintech companies have pursued recommendations in a way that is understandable, useful, and empowering, and some haven't. So that's the positive in terms of some direct applicability. I keep talking about prehistory, I'm not 80, but so the prehistory, what I want to point out, and I think my colleagues on the panel will definitely hear me what I'm saying, is that algorithm is sort of a rules-based model that takes inputs, outputs. And fintech is probably one of or financial services is one of the sectors that has been using algorithms for the longest, and that's to assign risk. And so I want to just say really quickly something about risk and about disenfranchisement. So when we look at actuarial tables, when we look at the features we use to say whether someone deserves to participate or not, or deserves preferential access or not, that already has a deeply troubling history. It connects in the US, for example, to things like redlining, like real social, I think, malfeasance on the part of the financial services sector. And so I think a thing that fintech needs to keep in mind very deeply and at its core is not reproducing that same kind of flawed approach to looking at who gets to participate and who gets preferential treatment or access to certain products and services in our sector. I think that's the biggest risk and will be when it comes to AI and fintech really in the next decade.
Again, that trust, it always just kind of circles back to that trust idea. I love that you said that it's to be lost, it's to be gained and not lost. And carrying on to what you're just elaborated on there too, Abbas. Well said. I kind of want you to take off like your very serious hats in a sense, not that you've been very serious, but looking now, because we've moved from, kind of what is it doing, what's your role, this new AI piece, although maybe, as you just mentioned, it's not so new, but new to the public. If you were to put on your creative hat and think, where are we going now, or what things we're focusing on for the future, what would you say those things are specifically? Sara, I would love to get your input on that and where you think fintech is going or could be going here.
It's a big ask, Nick.
So, we'll get 3 minutes of silence here so we can think it about. What's the first thing that you think of, Sara, I guess, when you say where are we going and where would I like to explore more?
Well, I'm going to take that guy. My answer is kind of literal, which is that we're going everywhere. I think the idea is that fintech, like your money, everything, like the idea of you moving around and doing things does not have your money that's no longer a question of, okay, if I get paid, where is my money going to go? If I do freelance work for another business in another country, how are we going to work out payments? The idea that money moves around just as easily as people do, I think is sort of the next idea. And I sort of cheated by looking at some of the comments in this section here, and I see that Rose said, I noticed there's a core assumption that non-Western countries and non-Western world want their currency to be digitized. I think that non-Western countries are some of the most interesting places to think about the mobility of money, because you're thinking about things like, remittances and moving from country to country for economic reasons. I think exploring the digitization of money within that context is going to give us some really interesting places to move forward, as opposed to focusing on what we've always focused on, which is like rich people in industrialized countries. So that's where, at least I hope, we'll be moving forward.
Wonderful. And thanks for catching that comment there. Olga, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've looking at this comment for quite a while, but I think money and relationship with money, it evolves around the globe in so different ways and in different forms, depending on the constraints. What we have in northern America and also in Europe is completely different what's happening in China, and I think they're on the forefront of whatever needs to be done in order to make money movement accessible and easy and democratized, even though it sounds funny in connection to the China. And the revolution that is happening in Africa, where they use mobile phones to move money around, and this is the base of moving things around. That's super interesting. So I not necessarily think that making money more accessible in a Western way is the way, actually. I think we need to look around the globe to see and took inspiration from everywhere, like how things can be done, because culturally it's really challenging to see like how things are doing your neighbors and trying to merge it together and create something even better together. So if we would think like where the fintech is moving, I think this like democratization of the financial resources and access to it. And the possibility for people to move around and not to be attached to a specific place, because borders are not real.
Right.
So borders for the money shouldn't be real as well.
That democratize. I think actually it's funny, Abbas, I think you were the one that actually mentioned that's what you're trying to do at Robinhood. This is a perfect segue. Olga, you're doing the work for me. Abbas, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So with regards to that, I think participation for the individual is like what the sector has kind of looked at, whether that be the enterprise individual or the end consumer individual. And I think one question for the sector moving forward is, what about different layers of collectivities or collectives, and how can fintech unlock value for them? And so I mean everything from institutions to entire sort of communities, maybe of tens of millions or hundreds of millions. What does catering to and serving the goals and the financial needs of those collectivities look like? Is that going to launch, 1,000 new companies? I hope it does, because I actually think that when we look at how financial systems work, they're nested hierarchies. However, the sector thus far has been focused on individual business units and individual customers for a large part, not saying 100%, but I think looking at these different layers of collectivities is kind of there. And I will just tack on, just peeping the chat there a little bit. I know Frank. Hey, Frank, I really appreciate his response. So part of my doctoral studies was looking or studying subaltern theory. And I think one of the dangers here, in addition to the danger of making assumptions based on where we sit, is assuming that people are radically, completely different humans because they sit in a different region of the world, that they don't want to participate, that they don't want digitalization. We shouldn't assume that for them. This is why UX research is really helpful, plugging our discipline to say understanding things in context and with regards to the value systems and meaning making that really matter to people wherever they live. So I did want to tack that on.
I just want to quickly add on to that, Abbas, because I feel like that's a really important point. We've seen, like, if we're going to, and I don't like dividing the world into Western and non-Western countries for starters. But if we're going to take, if we're going to remove, the Anglo-speaking world and the European Union, for example, as what we've traditionally conceived as the global north or Western countries or industrialized or whatever category you want to use, we've seen in loads of so many other countries that are not parts of those areas become digitized and use the digital world within their own societies without it being imposed on them. I mean, I think my first instinct, and this comes from, me, my family is Egyptian, the Arab Spring, the use of social media and Twitter to communicate, to show the world what's going on. This was a very organic use of resources. And I think it's kind of dangerous to say that we don't want to digitize, or people in other countries don't want to digitize their finances as a way to gatekeep, because we don't want them to. So I really, I think it's important to remain open to other modes of thinking. If that is not something that works for someone, if communities have different ways, I think about collective savings, for example. The apps that we talk about, there's a lot of focus on the individual, right? Mm-hmm. But as Abbas was saying about, we want to imagine different kinds of collectives. My grandmother in Egypt, that's how she got her washing machine, was everyone in her building. Every week you put money in a pot, and then each month it's a different person's turn to collect all of the money. And so thinking about how people imagine money within their own spaces is absolutely important, but we have to be careful not to close that path off to them, just because a lot of people have used that sort of they don't have the capacity for digitalization, or that's not part of their culture, as a way to keep people out.
Olga, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I really appreciated all the great perspectives, and the question kind of resonated, I think, to everyone reading it. So I'd love to hear what you have to think about that as well. Sarah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is a very, very personal thing happening right now, because my parents are still in Belarus. And there was a point this year when government started to freeze people's accounts because of the political activity. And the first thing I did, I was like, okay, I need to open a digital bank account for my parents so they can transfer their money outside of the country. Then they don't get lose their life savings and things like that. And it was extremely complicated because they don't have European citizenship, and so they cannot move their money out even if they want to. So I would really appreciate at some point if people wouldn't be attached to specific government or specific country or specific institution with their way, how they want to keep their finances in the future and how they want to distribute them and how they want to use that.
Wonderful. Thank you for that personal touch. All three of you, I really appreciate the personal touch. Fintech is personal as well, right? So these sorts of questions, those probing questions, are super important for us to know on the research side, because I too am a researcher. But I think that encapsulates everything I wanted to know, and I know you guys have addressed some of the questions in the chat. So I just want to say thank you for being involved, being so in tune. And again, that personal touch, I think that kind of makes us realize that it does impact all of us, and it's going to continue to grow and impact all of us. So we really appreciate it, and look forward to chatting more in the future, if and when possible, because this is not going anywhere anytime soon. At least I hope not, because I use fintech and I need it. On that note, too, I just want to let everyone know that MindSpark is doing a Spark Summit this June, coming up again. If you've been able to join it last year, it's a blast, Sarah. I know that you were in part of it. Yes, last year. Yeah, the cheerleading, love it. Norbert, my colleague, has just dropped a link inside the chat. So if you want to click that, get signed up, get ready to hear wonderful voices. Maybe you'll see some of these panelists there. Who knows? Other than that, everyone, thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. Do take care, stay safe, and don't forget to use fintech. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, everyone.
Save one.
Thanks very much.
Ciao.